Dinky, A Filly That Is Loved by Vincent 5000X. Chapter 13, The End, Part 1. Dinky kept her eyes firmly shut as she sat wherever it was she had been placed. All she knew was that it was dark and small, voices from nearby only just reaching her ears. I can't do this, Miss Jem," one pony stuttered. "We just full-napped a filly after assaulting a pony. We are bucked." "Oh, quit your sniveling," Glittering Gem's voice interjected. Dinky couldn't quite help but cringe as she heard her mother's voice again. "As long as you listen like a good little mare, everything will work out." "Are you insane?" the other pony screamed. Suddenly, there was a deafening silence. "How dare you question me?" I'm sorry, it's just..." The other pony began to whimper, only to be interrupted by Glittering Gem again. "Just take that doll and get out of my sight." Glittering Gem's voice seethed. A few moments later, the sound of a door being opened and then slammed echoed through the air. "Little slut better thank Celestia that I have more pressing matters to handle." Glittering Gem's voice followed from close by. "I wonder if that any ponies noticed how late I am for check-in." A strange silence followed Glittering Gem's question. A silence that did nothing but engulf Dinky in her dark surroundings. "Derpy!" her father called, trying his best to keep up with his daughter. "I have to find her!" Derpy yelled back, throwing back as much force into her wing beats as possible. "But flying off like this isn't going to accomplish anything," Derpy's father continued, obviously becoming fatigued. "You aren't paying attention. You'll just end up hurting yourself in your rush." No sooner had the older Pegasi said this than Derpy blasted through a hanging street sign, brushing off the impact as if it never happened. But even in the light of the moon, Derpy's father could see a fresh cut on Derpy's side. "I can't stop until I find her," Derpy yelled, taking a sharp turn. Seeing an opportunity, Derpy's father angled himself into Derpy's flight path, catching her off guard and tackled her to the ground. "You have to calm down," he yelled, holding Derpy down as gently as he could. But Derpy was quick to fight back, using all her strength to push her father off. But no matter what she tried, her father wouldn't let her off the ground. "Go home. I'll handle this." "What?" Derpy asked, her body going rigid as tears began to form in her eyes. "But I have to find Dinky." "No, Derpy," her father continued, finally releasing his daughter. "Not only has Dinky been full-napped, but this could turn into a hostage situation." "Hostage?" Derpy yelled, jumping to her hoofs as her fears began to overtake her mind. "But who would do this? What do they want?" "Derpy," her father sighed, placing one of his hooves on Derpy's shoulder. "I will get her back. Just go home and wait for me. I'll bring her back safe, I promise." "But Dad, "No buts, Derpy," her father replied, moving past her. "Go home, clean that cut, and wait for me to come back with Dinky." Then before another word could be said, Derpy's father took off towards the police station, leaving Derpy alone on the street. "Now what am I going to do with you?" Glittering Gem asked Dinky. The little filly just looked back at her mother, suspended several feet off the ground. "Maybe I could just leave you in the closet for the night." Dinky looked back at her mother as the pressure of her words sank into her. She couldn't understand why her mother was so mean to her. She knew she hadn't done anything wrong. Derpy had told her that it was impossible for her to do wrong. Yet her mother still treated her so poorly. "Oh, don't give me that look," Glittering Gem said, placing Dinky back on the ground. "I'm not going to do anything to you. Yet." Dinky watched as her mother traveled into a separate room and reappeared with a small pillow. "No, that would be too easy," she continued, picking the filly back up with her magic. "I have to think ahead a bit more this time. If I'm lucky, I should have at least a few more hours till they figure out you're gone. Another hour for them to realize I took you." Dinky watched as her mother used her magic to open a small closet door. Without even a single moment's hesitation, she threw the pillow onto the ground, dropping the filly on top of it without the slightest regard for her safety. "Hopefully by then, I'll be long gone from here," Glittering Gem said, inspecting one of her hoofs. "And you," she continued, looking at Dinky out of the corner of her eyes, "you'll be gone too." "I can't go home," Derpy told herself, running down another random street. She prayed for some type of sign, something to help her find Dinky, but as she galloped through another empty street, her hope began to falter. Every minute that passed only caused Derpy's fears to increase. Every pony she passed, Derpy would ask if they had seen anything that could help her, but each pony merely waved her off like she was crazy, telling her to go to the police before they would trot off, leaving her alone once again. "I just want my muffin back," Derpy whimpered, curling up under a dead streetlight, burying her face in her hooves. "Excuse me, ma'am," a voice softly asked next to Derpy. "Are you okay?" No," Derpy stuttered, her face still buried deep in her hoofs. "What's wrong?" Derpy twitched as she felt a hoof touch her shoulder. Her instincts told her to run from the stranger, but her body wouldn't move from its position. Somepony took my muffin," Derpy wept, her tears pooling on the ground below her chin. "Ma'am, were you raped? Do you need the police?" The pony began to yell, a tone of panic and worry in her voice. "No, I wasn't raped," Derpy yelled back, finally taking her face out of her hoofs to face the pony that was talking to her. "Somepony full-napped my Shooting Star? Derpy?" The Pegasi responded, finally recognizing who it was she had been talking to. Even in the dark, Derpy couldn't help but notice a look of fear suddenly wash over Shooting Star's face. "What are you doing out so late at night?" Derpy asked, wiping fresh tears from her cheeks. You see, I got this case of munchies, and," she responded, taking several steps back. "What?" Derpy asked, mildly confused as she took a step forward. Suddenly, her hoof came into contact with a small, soft object. "I think you dropped something," Derpy sniffled as she picked up the object with her hoof. "Wait! Derpy, don't!" But Shooting Star's shout fell on deaf ears as Derpy stared at the stuffed pony in her hoof, one specially ordered to look exactly like her. "Why do you have this?" Derpy seethed, her tears coming to an abrupt halt. But instead of answering, Shooting Star turned and ran down a nearby street, not daring to look back. "Get back here!" Derpy yelled at the top of her lungs. Flying after her fleeing target, she could feel her rage fueling her wings as she quickly began to catch up to Shooting Star. Derpy opened her mouth, intent on closing it on the fleeing Pegasi's tail. "Oh, Buck!" Shooting Star said as she took to the sky, flying away as fast as she could. But Derpy wasn't going to let her get away that easily, as she began to throw all her strength into her wings. "Where is she?" Derpy yelled as she closed in on her target. She could hear Shooting Star breathing heavily as her speed began to quickly decrease. Before Derpy could fix her own speed, she plowed into the other Pegasi, forcing both of them to the ground with a loud crack. "Ah, my wing!" Shooting Star cried as she pushed Derpy off her. Derpy could see the Pegasi's wing bending at a mildly odd angle. I think it's broken," she continued, looking back at her wing. "A lot more is going to be broken if you don't tell me where Dinky is, you bitch!" Derpy yelled, jumping onto her hoofs. Before Shooting Star could respond, Derpy lunged forward and forced her against a nearby wall. "Now where is my muffin?" "Derpy, please," Shooting Star began to beg. "I didn't mean for this to happen. We were just supposed to—" "We?" Derpy yelled, pressing harder against the Pegasi. "What the buck did you do?" She said we were just supposed to scare you, mess with some of your things." Shooting Star stuttered, trying to push back against her captor. "But then she said to take the foal, and she looked at me with this crazy, deranged look in her eyes. I panicked. I'm sorry. I didn't know this would happen. Please don't tell my parents. I don't belong in jail." Shooting Star finished, crying hysterically as she continued to rant. "That's not what I want to hear. Who is this other pony? Why did they take Dinky? Where are they?" Derpy wanted to crush the pony she had pinned to the wall. Shooting Star had just admitted to taking Dinky, and all she wanted was not to go to jail. Derpy could feel her rage reaching an unheard-of limit. "Glittering Gem, she—" A gray hoof interrupted Shooting Star's sentence as it collided with the side of her face. "You let that monster take her?" Derpy yelled, raising her hoof to strike again. For a moment, Derpy considered hitting the Pegasi again, but decided to just leave it in the air. "Where is she?" Derpy asked, her hoof now shaking. She wanted to question what Glittering Gem was doing outside of jail, but it was time she couldn't waste. "She's at the Trotsworthy Hotel," Shooting Star quickly responded through her tears, small droplets of blood dripping from the corner of her mouth. "Room 337. Please, Derpy, I don't want to go to jail." "Is that all you care about?" Derpy yelled, releasing the Pegasi and dropping her hoof. You full-napped my muffin, and all you care about is not going to jail. All Shooting Star did was crumble to the ground in tears, begging for forgiveness. This isn't over, Derpy yelled as she took off. She didn't want to waste another moment in finding the young foal. Dinky curled herself as much as she could on the small pillow, afraid of the darkness around her. She felt alone as her thoughts continued to circle around the fact that her mother was planning something for her. Where is that damn room service already? Dinky heard her mother ask herself. 5-star my flank. I ordered that roast salad half an hour ago. Suddenly, Dinky heard a knocking sound from what she guessed was the front door. Took them long enough, Glittering Gem grumbled. The sound of a door opening was then heard as Glittering Gem greeted the pony outside it. 1 roast salad with a side of daffodils and a strawberry shake, a pony said. Thank you, Glittering Gem responded, followed by a door being slammed. Suddenly, the closet door opened, and Dinky was blinded as a light quickly flooded in. Before she could even register what was happening, a small plate was placed next to her with 2 daffodils on it. You're old enough to eat that, right? Glittering Gem asked, not really caring. After a huff, the closet door was closed, and Dinky was back in the darkness. You should be grateful that I even gave you that, Glittering Gem's voice echoed from outside the door. Maybe you end up choking on it and... A loud banging interrupted Glittering Gem's statement. Will somepony quiet that infernal racket? Glittering Gem shouted over the banging. Suddenly, there was a loud crashing sound as Derpy's voice filled the closet. Give her back! Derpy didn't waste a single moment as she lunged at the stunned unicorn. Give her back! She shouted as she flew towards Glittering Gem, but just as she was about to connect, she felt herself freeze in mid-flight. I have to admit, Glittering Gem said with a chuckle, her horn glowing and a look of mild shock on her face. I didn't think you'd find me this fast. Then her expression turned darker as her gaze connected with the mad Pegasi's eyes. I was actually hoping that it would be that damn Miranda case. Give her back, Derpy repeated, using all her strength to fight back at the magic that held her. The magic wasn't focused around her entire body, but more on its key areas, like her wings and legs, all being forced to remain motionless. Now why would I do that? Glittering Gem asked with a slight grin. Derpy watched as the unicorn proceeded to sit down on a nearby couch. I mean, she is my foal. I should be allowed to do with her what I want. Suddenly, a quick jolt of pain came from Derpy's left wing. Daring to glance back at it, Derpy watched as one of her feathers flew past her face and levitated in front of Glittering Gem's face. I thought you Pegasi were supposed to take care of these things, she commented as she looked the gray feather over. Where is she? Derpy seethed as she felt another feather being plucked. She could tell that the magic holding her hoofs had weakened, so Glittering Gem could pluck her feathers. But it still wasn't enough for her to free them. Why do you care? Glittering Gem chuckled, a group of 5 feathers already accumulated in front of her. I mean, she's not even yours, she continued as she stood back up and circled the room. Looking over her shoulder, Derpy watched as Glittering Gem proceeded to look out into the hallway before forcing the broken door closed. Why are you doing this? Derpy asked as another 3 feathers were pulled out at once. Derpy knew that if any more were pulled out, she would have trouble flying. Again, why would you care? Glittering Gem asked, moving about the room as she closed any open window blinds. I have my reasons for doing what I did, and will do. Derpy couldn't help but shudder as the unicorn said this, and another feather was plucked. Please, Derpy began to plead. I don't care what you do to me, just don't hurt my muffin. Muffin? Glittering Gem said as she burst out into a laughing fit. Suddenly, the laughing stopped and was replaced with a scowl as the unicorn placed her ever-increasing group of feathers on the ground. So not only did you give a name to a foal that isn't yours, you also gave her a ridiculous nickname. Somepony had to, Derpy yelled through the pain of a primary feather being pulled out. And apparently it wasn't going to be her mother. Oh, shut up, you autistic little brat, Glittering Gem said as she lost the last of her composure. Derpy suddenly felt the pain of several primary feathers pulled out at once as the magic that held her was released, dropping her to the ground. That should be enough to keep you from flying away. Dinky felt her heart skip a beat as she heard Derpy's voice. She knew that she would be saved from the darkness. Derpy always saved her from the darkness. You know, Glittering Gem's voice chuckled from outside the closet door, I can't help but question your real motives behind caring so much for my foal. Dinky felt a small pain in her heart when her mother referred to her as her foal. It made her feel like an object that could be left and forgotten, something that didn't even deserve to have a mother. Because you won't, Derpy shouted back. You left your own daughter to die in a trash can. You are a monster that should be locked up and should never... Dinky jumped as the sound of glass breaking interrupted Derpy's statement. Derpy held her hoof to the side of her head. She could already feel small amounts of blood trickling from a fresh cut. How dare you insult me, you little whelp! Glittering Gem seethed, a half-broken vase still held in her magic. Do you really want to know why I wanted to get rid of her? Why my life would be better off without her? A constant reminder of my worst mistake. What could be so important that you would be willing to kill your own daughter for? Derpy yelled as she lunged forward, but Glittering Gem easily stepped aside as Derpy tumbled past her and into a wall. How about my life? The unicorn began to yell, dropping what she held in her magic. My career, perhaps, but most of all, Glittering Gem continued, now standing over Derpy. It's something I never wanted. Then why have her in the first place? Derpy yelled as she jumped up and finally tackled the unicorn. Derpy threw Glittering Gem into the side of the nearby couch, quickly jumping on top of her before she could register what to do. Why torment her like you did? Why abandon her like you did? Derpy felt her hoof collide with the side of the unicorn's face, with every word she spoke. Suddenly, her hoof froze mere inches from Glittering Gem's face. You bitch! Glittering Gem roared, sending out a magical shockwave that threw Derpy back against the wall, small droplets of blood dripping from the side of her mouth. I don't see the need to explain anything to you! Derpy felt her body suddenly lifted up and then slammed back into the ground. Glittering Gem continued to slam Derpy into the ground 3 more times before she released her magic once again. Just let her go, Derpy coughed, pain pulsing through her chest. Please! Why do you care about her? The unicorn yelled, wiping her face with a cloth. All that thing is just a burden. Derpy threw herself back at the unicorn, slamming both her front hooves into the unicorn's chest. How dare you call her a thing? Derpy yelled, pushing Glittering Gem into an adjacent wall. Once again, Derpy began punching the unicorn with her hoof. Only this time, she aimed for the horn. Dinky listened to everything that was going on outside the door. Even though she couldn't see what was going on, she knew that both Derpy and her mother were fighting, but she couldn't tell who was winning. How dare you call her a thing? Derpy's voice yelled, followed by several loud thuds. Several moments of awkward silence soon followed as Dinky began to fear the worst. Suddenly, the closet door opened, and Dinky was blinded by the light once again. Before her eyes could adjust, Dinky felt herself being lifted up, not by magic, but by a pair of hooves. Thanks, Celestia, you're all right, Derpy cried as she brought Dinky in for a hug. Dinky quickly returned the hug, overjoyed by the fact that Derpy had saved her. Pulling herself from the hug, Dinky looked around the large room. On one side, Glittering Gem lay in a crumpled heap, small sparks jumping from her horn as she lay unconscious. It's okay. She's not going to hurt you anymore, Derpy said, drawing the young foal's attention. Dinky couldn't help but cringe at the sight of the pony that held her. She had several cuts on her face that were bleeding, and a black eye was beginning to form around her left eye. I'm okay, Derpy said as she carefully nuzzled the top of Dinky's head, trying her best not to let blood drip on her. Derpy held the filly close to her, hugging her once again. Time seemed to stand still as she held Dinky as close as she could, happy to see Dinky safe and unhurt. I was so afraid that she had hurt you, Derpy said as she looked back down at Dinky. She felt a small weight ease off her aching shoulders as she stared at the smiling foal. Why? A voice choked from nearby. Looking over, Derpy wasn't surprised to see Glittering Gem's eye half open as she stared at the two of them. Why do you care so much for my foal? Don't you understand what you'll have to give up just to care for her? Derpy watched as the unicorn forced herself to her hooves, wobbling as she tried to stand up straight. Yes, I do, Derpy seethed, facing the unicorn. But for her, I will do anything to keep her safe and happy. Because, for a moment, Derpy paused and contemplated what she was about to say, and what it would mean for her and Dinky. But the more she thought about it, the more she was sure that it was what she wanted. She's my daughter, and I love her. Dinky couldn't tell which was louder, her mother's scream or the sudden explosion from her horn. All she knew was that she was falling, her mind trying its best to understand exactly what Derpy had just told her mother. Dinky! Looking up, Dinky watched as Derpy came plummeting towards her, her wings tucked in as she quickly scooped her up and wrapped her body around her. Derpy wrapped as much of her body as she could around the foal as she closed her eyes, knowing that it would be the only thing to shield the foal from the hard impact of the ground. But as moments passed into seconds, Derpy cracked an eye open, wondering what had happened. By Celestia's mane, that was close, Miranda gasped, standing nearby with her horn aglow. I was afraid I wouldn't catch you two in time. All Derpy could do was chuckle as everything around her faded into black. And then we add some water to the bucket, Derpy told the little filly, pouring some water into a small plastic bucket. Then we pack it in. She continued, pushing her hoof down on the wet sand in the bucket. Finally, we turn it over and let it slide out. With that, Derpy turned the bucket over and slowly began to lift it up. But just as the bucket was fully removed, the clump of wet sand crumbled. That's the third one, Derpy sighed, placing the bucket to her side. I'm sorry, Muffin. The sand just doesn't want to cooperate today. Derpy couldn't help but feel a little sad, having not been able to make even a basic sandcastle for the filly in front of her. But as she looked up, she couldn't help but chuckle as the filly held the small plastic shovel in her hooves, a smile on her face. I love you, Muffin, Derpy said as she scooped the little filly into a big hug. Dinky stared down at her new mother as she slept peacefully, a smile on her face. She couldn't help but relive the moment she would never forget. Dinky's mother wobbled in front of her and Derpy, with her piercing eyes as her horn sparkled, a crack easily visible in its side. Because, Derpy began, giving her own piercing stare at Dinky's mother. She's my daughter, and I love her. Dinky still couldn't believe that Derpy had called her her daughter. She had always wanted it, and now that it was true, she couldn't be any happier. A mother that didn't hate her, but loved her more than her own life. She could already tell her life would be better from that point on. Derpy? A voice softly said in the Pegasi's ear. Derpy, are you awake? Now I am, Derpy moaned as she slowly awoke to reality. Derpy's body felt slightly numb, and she couldn't feel her wings at all. Where's Dinky? She asked as she looked to her side. She's right here, Derpy's father said, holding a concerned yet smiling foal in his arm. Almost immediately, Dinky began squirming, trying her best to get over to Derpy. Where am I? Derpy asked as she took Dinky in her arms. Even though they were slightly numb, she could still feel the young foal in her arms. In the hospital, Derpy's father responded, rubbing the top of Dinky's head with his hoof. We brought you here after you passed out. I can't believe you jumped out a window with your wings like that. But I had to save my daughter, Derpy said as she looked at her bandaged wings. Each were bound tightly with bandages and had blotches of blood dotted in random locations. I'm not saying you shouldn't have, it's just... Derpy's father froze mid-sentence as he realized what Derpy had just said. Just what? Derpy asked, suppressing her laugh at how shocked and confused her father looked. He began to stutter. Did you say daughter? Because I think I heard you say daughter, and I just wanted to make sure that that is what you said, and... Yes, Derpy chuckled as she stopped her father's incoherent rant. If her own mother won't be a mother to her, then I will, Derpy told her father with a serious face. I just never expected Glittering Gem to explode like that. So that's what happened, Miranda said as she walked into the hospital room. Glad to see you're finally awake. She chuckled as she walked over to the bed. She was arrested, right? Derpy questioned, trying her best to hide her anger. Yes, she was, Miranda replied as she nuzzled the side of Dinky's face. She's currently cuffed to an infirmary bed back at the station with 2 unicorn guards. She should have been in jail, Derpy partially yelled, trying her best not to yell in Dinky's ear. I know, Ms. Hoofs, Miranda said with a sigh. Unfortunately, there wasn't much I could do. I know, Derpy sighed. But what took all of you so long to find out where we were? Aren't there records or something for where she's supposed to be? Yes, Miranda continued, a small look of annoyance on her face. Unfortunately, she wasn't where she was supposed to be. She paused for a second before she continued. If it weren't for that Pegasi that limped into the station when she did, It would have taken us most of the night to find out where she was. So Shooting Star turned herself in, did she? Derpy huffed as she drew Dinky into another hug. I hope she goes to jail for what she did. She'll get what she deserves, Ms. Hooves, Miranda said, giving a confident smile. Even though she helped find Glittering Gem, she was still an accomplice. Good, Derpy huffed, nuzzling the top of Dinky's head. So what now? Now you can go back to how it should be, Miranda said with a smile. Both you and your daughter. Will every pony please stop saying that? Derpy's father sighed. Daughter, Derpy chuckled. Daughter, 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 daughter. Okay, Derpy's father chuckled. But are you sure of this? It's not going to be as easy as you think. I don't care, Derpy said as she curled up in the bed, feeling her exhaustion begin to take her away. She's my little muffin, and I love her. With that, Derpy drifted into sleep, her daughter snuggled up close to her chest, both dreaming of the rest of their lives together. The end.